India is growing at about 7.5% per annum. It's an oasis of growth in the midst of a very, very barren economic landscape across the world. But the challenge for India is really to grow at rapid rates of about 9 to 10% per annum, year after year, year after year, for 3 decades or more, to be able to lift a very young population above the poverty line. India is passing through a window of demographic transition, which rarely happens in history. 72% of its population is below the age of 32, and it's very much like the baby boomers population of UK, which drove it to high digits of growth. But there are several challenges of transforming India. And what are these challenges? I think the first and foremost is that India in the last 68 years had made itself a very complex, very complicated, and a very difficult place to do business in. And therefore, when the new government came into power about 2 years back, one of its key challenges was how does it make India one of the easiest places to do business in? And it has, over the last 2 years, scrapped a number of rules, regulations, procedures, paperwork, just done this in plenty to make India extremely easy and simple places to do business in. It's scrapped almost about 1,153 acts. 1,153 acts in the last 18 months. But India is a very large country. It's bigger than 24 countries of Europe. And therefore, it's governed by several states. It's a very large federal country. And therefore, the challenge is that how do you make states very easy and simple? And one of the key things which we tried to do was to list down a series of action points for the states, interacted with them, and then we said we'll make the states compete against them. And last year, we against about 150 points, states competed on ease of doing business. We got a third party called the World Bank, evaluated the states. And we said we are going to name and shame the states. And every state worked on it. Every state worked on it. And it was very interesting results. Gujarat came number 1. Andhra came number 2 by a small margin. But the mineral-rich states of Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, which were way behind, all rushed up and made radical changes and came number 3 and number 4. This year, on ease of doing business, we are doing this on 344 points, about almost 150 of them relating to small and medium enterprises. But we're carrying that experiment forward on education and health, which are extremely critical for India. How do you challenge the states into achieving excellence in education and health, on nutrition, etc.? And this, we are taking it forward. So ease of doing business was very critical. Second was that in a globalized world, India has to be an integral part of the global supply chain. And therefore, India had to open up its economy. So we opened up defense manufacturing, insurance, pension funds, a vast range of our sectors. And India is today one of the most open economies of the world. Our FDI grew up by about 48% at a point of time when across the world FDI has fallen by about 16%. The third key challenge was that India has a unique energy about its startups. Young Indians just challenging the world, Flipkart and Snapdeal taking on the Amazons of the world, and it's got a unique ecosystem. The challenge was to spur that on. And we drove a very fascinating startup action plan, which led to creation of 500 tinkering labs across schools, hundreds of incubation centers, grand challenges, so that these startups can drive innovation in India in a very big way. I think the fourth key challenge before India is that we are seeing a huge movement towards urbanization. And in the next 2 decades, we'll see about 350 million Indians moving into the process of urbanization. But if you go by the latest McKinsey study, by 2050, you'll have 700 million Indians getting into the process of urbanization in India. And the challenge is to create, in the next 4 decades, 2.5 Americas. Now, when America urbanized, land, gas, and water were cheaply available. These are scarce commodities. And if we follow the European and the American model, you'll need 4 planet Earths to urbanize. You just don't have that luxury. And therefore, how do you do innovative, sustainable urbanization will be one of the key challenges for India. I think fifth challenge to my mind about India is that it's one of the rare few countries which has 1 billion mobiles. It is a country which has 1 billion biometrics. Its Aadhaar movement of biometric is very unique. It's the only country, and to my mind, by 2024, India will have 1 billion smartphones. 1 billion smartphones, every Indian with a biometric is leading to a very revolutionary transformation in governance. India's system over the years had a lot of leakages in terms of supply of LPG, kerosene, in terms of teachers' pension, government support. All of them are getting hugely plugged by biometrics and by smartphones. And smartphone is driving governance in a very, very big way. The spread of what we call as the Jam Trinity, that is the Jan Aadhaar, that is your biometric, your mobile, and your bank accounts, is hugely having an impact in terms of reducing the cost of transaction. If physical bank branches were to be established, the cost of transaction is as high as 15,000 rupees. If you were to spread it through biometrics, it radically falls to just 10 rupees, and therefore it has the potential to lift 100 million people above the poverty line, simply above the poverty line. And therefore, to my mind, the biggest transformation that is taking place is in terms of technology, in terms of the spread of smartphones, in terms of the spread of biometrics, in terms of enabling services across sectors. Every single thing of public services is linked to online transformation in terms of providing access to people, in terms of biometric. And therefore, the challenge for government is to use, because India has been a very reluctant urbanizer, it's been a reluctant user of technology, how to use technology and the process of urbanization to make a quantum jump forward is one of the key challenges. Fortunately, the Prime Minister himself is a very big driver of technology. He's one of the most technology-savvy Prime Ministers, and therefore he's driving it personally across sectors. He's doing it across education, across health. One of the very remarkable success has been the rural electrification scheme, where geotagging and where WhatsApp was used to ensure that electrification process in rural areas succeeded. We're spreading this across to teachers in schools, across colleges, to ensure better attendance by teachers, to ensure that doctors reach rural health centers. And this vast revolution can only happen in terms of better quality of delivery of services, in terms of making a quantum jump is feasible only through technology. Now, there are several challenges for India. The challenges of trying to achieve a 9 to 10% growth over a 3-decade period has several challenges. And I think, to my mind, the key challenge is one of ensuring that women play a far more critical and significant role. In India, women contribute only 17% of the GDP, just 24% of the skilled workforce, against 40% across the world. And therefore, if women are able to become a very key driver of India's economy, its potential to create 750 billion contribution to the GDP by 2025. So that's a very critical factor. There are the challenges in terms of bureaucratic mindset. You know, the top layer of bureaucracy has changed, but to spread it down, 68 years of control down to the lowest level is a very big challenge. One of the key experiments recently carried out by the Prime Minister himself, and he does a lot of outcome-based monitoring. Every month, we do an outcome-based presentation to him. So we lay down targets, we monitor against that target. We created a dashboard to monitor these achievements. Well, one of the key experiments that was recently carried out by him was that he gave a presentation, broke out the entire bureaucracy, the secretaries, into 8 different groups, made them all give presentation on 8 different subjects which can transform India. After these presentations, their recommendations were then adopted by each of the ministries into their action plan, and therefore the entire bureaucracy has created a plan of action for India driving growth to 10%. And by 2032, if you are able to grow at 10%, the power of compounding is so enormous that India will be able to create 175 million jobs, literally take poverty away from India. And therefore, the entire bureaucracy has taken it as a challenge themselves. as their action plan to drive change in India. Now, these are some of the key things which I thought I'll mention, but there are several challenges. I mean, to my mind, transformation and change is about people. There are huge expectations. People want radical changes. People want growth. People want to lift themselves above poverty line, and therefore the expectations are huge and immense. And to my mind, we seem to be on the right direction. All the direction is right, but there is a need to accelerate, and therefore a huge amount will depend on how well India is able to utilize technology to drive this change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your questions, comments? Yes.
My name is John Hicklin. I have a question. How does this model of this institution differ from ones we've been familiar with for many years, the Planning Commission in India, for example? Why is it likely to be more successful than those other models? And what are the vested interests involved that might or might not prevent its success?
Would you like to?
Well, first of all, the process of 5-year plans have been done away with. So India had a 5-year planning process modeled on socialism, which was from the first 5-year plan, and that has been done away with. What has now been decided is that there will be a 15-year perspective, a vision statement. You will break that up into a 7-year perspective plan and then do a 3-year midterm review, which will actually coincide with our Finance Commission's outlays in terms of what each sector will get, what the states will get, and then on an annual basis do an outcome targeting, do a target and ensure that that target is achieved. So what the Prime Minister does is a monitoring of the target per sector on every month, and for him, the critical thing is implementation now. And therefore, he says that if you've achieved more than 100%, you get a green. If you're between 90 and 100%, you're yellow. And if you're less than 90%, you're red. So there's very close monitoring. I mean, the secretaries are under huge pressure, and the field agencies are under huge pressure to deliver on education, deliver on health, deliver on infrastructure. I think we've never seen this kind of challenge against outcomes. I think this is the first time that we are seeing an outcome-based implementation.
Mr. Kant, can I follow that up with a more personal sort of question for you? You know, many people in this room are from countries with civil services, not unlike India's, where you have, you know, ferociously difficult competition to get in. You know, truly brilliant people make it into the Indian administrative service. But the promotions thereafter aren't always awarded on the basis of commitment to outcomes, energy, and action. You know, there's an uneven set of those qualities at the top of most countries' civil services. How do you deal with that? You're a man who's got a vision, you're impatient, you want to deliver on it. You are surrounded, as anyone in any country would be, by senior people who would prefer not to act, because if they act, they have to take responsibility for the result. Yeah. So they'd rather not do anything. How do you deal with that?
Well, I joined the civil service in 1980. And, you know, I was Secretary Tourism in Kerala, where I developed it as a tourism destination through this campaign called God's Own Country. I later did the Incredible India campaign, and then I did Make in India, and recently the Startup India initiative. What the Indian civil service gets an opportunity to do, I don't think any civil service across the world or any private sector across the world gets. The opportunity, the challenges of trying to change a country. It's a unique opportunity. That's number one. You know, and to my mind, a meritorious person in the civil service always rises to the top and the mediocre is left behind. So at the end of my career, by the time I became secretary, there were just 12 of us in a batch of about 150 who could reach the secretary level. The rest were just left behind. So it's only merit that counts at the end of the day in the civil service. And it's become even tougher and tougher. And during this government, it's become so tough because guys who are not performing are just being sacked now. So, I mean, we've just had an example of 48 plus people from the tax department being sacked. It's never happened in India. So the government is challenging the civil services to deliver on ground, I mean, through outcomes. And I personally feel that the civil servants have taken this on as a challenge in terms of the 8 groups that were formed, and they said that we'll deliver to this growth levels, but they've said that these are a vast range of things that they will deliver, and therefore it's a very fascinating time for India. I mean, you can't get a better time than this to work for Government of India.
And what would you advise to a younger person in the room who might be working for one of the tax officials that just got the sack? If they've got to work for that person, you know, what's the way round? Should you shift sector? How do you get around that?
Don't ever work for the tax department. So always be in a developmental role. Tax departments lead you to a very negative kind of a perspective. Get onto a developmental role, work in areas of nutrition, health, education. There are huge challenges which you'll never get across the world, and these will enable you to evolve as a great person. I mean, I've always worked in commerce, industries, and in tourism. And then I moved over to the NITI Aayog. And suddenly I was asked to prepare outcomes on education, health, rural development, nutrition. And I was so fascinated. And I said, I've missed all these sectors all my life, and it's been such a learning process. I mean, I've evolved as a human being. I've learned so much. I mean, these are the biggest challenges. India can never be a great country ever till it doesn't improve the quality of its delivery on health and education.
So how many people in the room work for tax authorities? Well, I know there's one here, there's one there. Susan, who works in India's tax authority. Please, we look forward to your question.
Congratulations, Dr. Kant, because you exhibited the typical Indian administrative service bias, away from India on foreign soil.
Yeah.
How do you discount a department that wins? I mean, if you look at it, the state should reduce its functions only to law and order and to revenue administration. How do you justify a moribund bureaucracy? Or how do you even justify that the tax department in itself in India should be headed by an IAS officer himself?
No, I don't. I never said that it should be headed by an IAS officer. I've always said that there needs to be consistency, predictability, and clarity in policies. And the tax department has been singularly responsible for lack of consistency, predictability, and clarity. And to my mind, it's very important that policy and execution should be at arm's length. In India, the tax department creates the policy, evolves the policies, and then gets on to implementation. The policy department of the tax department, the revenue department, should never be manned by tax experts. They should be manned by professional economists. It should be manned by professional experts, not people from the tax department.
Are you in agreement with that, Susan?
I'm not.
So can you, because I'm not sure that those in the room that are not studying Indian politics would entirely understand your question, but what would your main point be to non-Indians in the room?
I guess, Ngaire, I'm just trying to dovetail your question of performance and motivation to perform with his answer of, meritorious people lasting. Right. Because in the Indian civil services system, it all depends on the age at which you get in, because it's a confirmed tenure of up till 60 years. So if you're able to get in at 20 or 22, you're assured a service of 38 years. Whereas if you get in at 27 or 28, you still have only 20 years or 23 years left. So that's one cutting edge. So really, I mean, somebody who gets in at 22 or 23, whether he or she performs or not, is assured service to last till the top, which is changing now probably. Because again, I mean, they are gunning a tax department for sacking officials and not the other departments, probably because it's an easier prey. And at the same time, the policies in tax are governed by political considerations. For example, if you decide to exempt agriculture from taxation, it's a political question rather than an economic question. So how far does the tax officials or tax department in any country get to decide the policies as far as, wedding the political compulsions with the economic necessity?
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Can you fire people Can you fire people in your institution?
Well, I've fired,
Even if they've been there for 28 years?
well, just last week I've fired about 22 people. I mean, for non-delivery, non-performance.
Right.
I mean, either you either perform or you just go back home. I mean, and these were all young people. I mean, we've taken them on as young professionals, etc. Either you deliver or just don't survive. I mean, it must be, government service must be like market. Either you deliver or you go bust. Yeah, as simple as that.
Right.
You can't run government with mediocrity anymore.
Sure.
Definitely not in India right now. And
I think what he means is you've just got to hire Blavatnik School graduates. Satyendra.
Thank you, sir. It's really exciting to hear and learn about. I'm a civil servant, a state civil servant in Haryana.
Yeah, wonderful.
So, my question is that there is certain visible change in the central system of working and the central bureaucratic system, but that has not percolated down in the state administrative
Are
system.
you referring to Haryana?
Almost all the states, like Uttar Pradesh. So it has not really percolated, and the initiatives which were taken at the center were copied and duplicated in the state services, but have not really yielded those kind of results. So how do you see this bridging of gap to be done?
To my mind, there are two things which the central government must do, and that is to challenge the state to deliver. Challenge on parameters, specific parameters, challenge them. And also support them. I mean, we created teams which could work with the state governments to achieve those targets. I mean, they were very critical when I was Secretary Industries. We said ease of doing business, you have to do these 100 points, but have workshops. We had something like about 200 workshops across states. And that's how, Jharkhand, I mean, I'd never heard of Jharkhand. I'd never heard of Chhattisgarh. I mean, these states outsmarted Maharashtra, they outsmarted Karnataka, they outsmarted Haryana. All these states were knocked out by these two mineral-rich states. I mean, and therefore, across education, across health, you have to put things in public domain. Just rank district hospitals, put it in public domain. Rank doctors, put them in public domain. Let people know how they are performing. Let electorate know whether the state is delivering or not. That's the challenge for India.
So I was going to call on Stephen. For an investor perspective, I'm interested, Mr. Kant is talking about the World Bank's ease of doing business results. And lots of governments around the world try to aim at these results and come up that. Does it matter for investors? Does India feel like an easier place to invest in?
Well, I don't know yet. India certainly felt like a very difficult place to invest in when I was investing there 3, 4, 5 years ago. And with a huge need to be successful in the types of reforms, Dr. Kant, that you're trying to get in place. I think the liberalizing market reforms that you're aiming at are clearly important. I guess sort of one of the questions I would have for you is to what extent you have broad support. Clearly you're trying to get support from the administration and the states. To what extent have you spent time getting broader support amongst the populace for this program, and how important is that to do it, to be successful? And when you talk about metrics and measures, to what extent are you prepared to be transparent broadly across the population as to those metrics and your success or not in achieving them?
So one is that last year we jumped up 12 positions in the ease of doing business, the World Bank's. And this year we expect to jump up by about a whopping 30 to 40 positions because of bankruptcy laws, national company law tribunal, structural transformations that have been carried on. My view is that this has nothing to do with electoral politics. My view is that making India easy and simple is a creation of the political and the administrative mindset. It's just a question of a vast number of rules, regulations, laws that were brought in and which need to be just discarded and just thrown away into the dustbin. It has nothing to do with electoral politics at all. I mean, to think that India's government is going to change by doing this is totally mistaken. India's government, which transforms India and takes it into a high trajectory growth, will be voted back to power. This government, which came into power, has been voted by a young population. And young population which wants India to grow at rates of 10% for the next 3 decades. This young population wants India to create jobs for a very young in demographic terms, it's a very young India. And therefore, this government, all the young peoples, what are they looking for? They're looking for growth, nothing else. Growth and jobs, nothing else.
I'm going to take three questions together. We've got quite a few. Johanna?
Thank you. I'm very fascinated by your institution, and forgive me if I missed it, but how did it come about? Was it through parliamentary action? Was it through the Prime Minister's office? Do you have a political head, or are you the civil servant, the head of the organization?
Great, thank you. And then, yes.
Hi, I'm Sushant. I'm from India, and I'm a master's student here at the Blavatnik School. So as a student here at Blavatnik, one of the key things we have been trained is to look at evidence and then ask questions on the basis of evidence. And one surprising fact which I saw over the last 1 year was regarding the growing unpopularity of public-private partnerships, PPPs, especially in OECD countries and like in Europe as well. So my question is that when you talk about transforming India, when you talk about improving ease of business, what role do you think PPP will play in the future? What has it played so far? And do you see India really evaluating its stance on PPP? Because coming from India, working with the Ministry of Health, PPP is almost seen as like the panacea for all problems that we face in the public sector. So what do you think the role PPP will play, especially in delivering public goods such as health and education?
Thank you. And one last question. Yeah, right there.
Thank you. Isaac from the University of Tokyo. This may be a slightly touchy question, but one that cuts to the heart of the issue of trust, especially in developing countries. It's about corruption. You have been involved in a lot of reform in the way that the civil service has been working. How big has corruption been a factor in your work, and where do you think this is going to be taken for your civil service, and what transferable lessons would there be for other countries?
Okay, so let me start with the last question first. And actually, one of the key planks of this government is about rule-based institutional reforms and about integrity. And actually, during the last 2 years, the central government has had no incidents of corruption at all. Not a single case of corruption. I mean, it's very rare across countries, but not a single case of corruption as far as this government is concerned, at the central level. Not one single case of corruption. So it's a government which is working with integrity, and I think corruption at the top level has totally vanished in India, because postings, etc., are all getting done on merit. It's totally vanished. It was unbelievable to me about 2 years back, but that's how it's happened. And, number two is the question about, and to my mind, it will be very difficult to deliver on this high growth rate for a long period of time without integrity, without laying down systems, rules, procedures. So everything is being put to auction. Natural resources are all being put to auction. Systems have been laid out. Everything is in public domain. Everything is being put on the net. So very rule-based kind of functioning. And that's a hugely redeeming factor of present-day India. The second question was about
Public-private partnership.
the public-private partnership, and I'm a great believer in public-private partnership, because it's impossible for India to achieve those levels of growth over a long period of time, because you need the resources. I mean, you'll never be able to find the resources without private-public partnership. But PPPs need to be very well structured. They need to be well de-risked. And they need you need to create a lot of special purpose vehicles, take all approvals, house them in that SPV, and then bid out the SPV, along with all the approvals. To my mind, government agencies need to do a lot of homework in terms of getting all the approvals up front and putting them in that SPV before bidding out in a transparent manner. But the challenge, there's a huge challenge, and that's the challenge for the government, to be able to structure the right kind of PPP projects to enable private sector to come in. Now, last 2-3 years, because of a global slowdown, PPPs have suffered not in India but across the world. But in India, they've suffered for lack of long-term lending. They've suffered for our inability to find solutions to contractual problems on a quick basis. But I think, so India has found unique solutions. It's come out with hybrid models of bidding for roads, which has done very well. It has done some very unique things, and actually in the last 1 year, road and rail activities have really pushed up. Road construction has gone up by 36%, rail commissioning of rail lines has gone up by as much as 52%, so huge growth in rail and road infrastructure. But we need to take this to the social sector. We need to take this to education, to health, and so on. So to my mind, those models are in the process of evolution, and they need to be cracked. Education and health in the long run without good private sector will be very difficult for India to deliver. Very good, efficient private sector functioning is required in that. So PPP, to my mind, is imperative. It's important. It's critical for India. Do it in a transparent, competitive manner. That's the key. But structure the projects well beforehand with all approvals. The third question was about...
Yes, on the third question, so when Prime Minister Modi was still campaigning before being elected, I remember him announcing that he would abolish the Planning Commission, which had been in India. And some commentators from India saying to me, if he wins the election, he'll create a new one, but he'll call it something different. So tell us, is it the same, but called something different, or what's different about the National Institution for transformation?
So it's radically different. It's radically different because it's the National Institution for Transforming India. First of all, it doesn't get into a planning process for a period of 5 years. Secondly, the earlier Planning Commission had become very overarching. So it was sitting in judgment over every department. It's not possible for a large country like India to say that I'm going to do fund allocation, I'm going to monitor your execution, I'm going to monitor your delivery to the extent of monitoring every single project. It was very much like the industrial licensing procedure which we had and which was dismantled in 1991. So the dismantling of Planning Commission was long overdue. It was long overdue and it was dismantled, and rightly so. Now the National Institute of Transforming India, Institution for Transforming India really functions as a think tank. Number two, it works in very close partnership with the state governments. And number three, it does a long-term perspective plan of with 15 years, with 7 years of 15 years vision document, 7 years of plan, and a 3-year midterm review. But more critical than that is that it does an outcome monitoring. And this is for the first time in India that we're doing very, very rigorous outcome-based monitoring. And since McKinsey is your knowledge partner here, I have a very strong team of young McKinsey professionals who work with me. They nudge me all the time to do the outcome-based monitoring.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you join me in thanking Mr. Amitabh Kant? It's been truly a pleasure to have you here. Fantastic.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to start with the congratulations. A number of you have survived an hour and a half after lunch without any caffeine infusions. A few of you haven't lasted so long. So if those of you, without casting any aspersions, who haven't lasted quite so long, could allow those who have survived to get to the queue first, that would be much appreciated. We have a short break of 25 minutes before going into 2 parallel sessions. Back in here, we'll be asking the question, can we innovate our way to flatter, faster, smarter government? And in the main lecture theatre across the other side of the forum, we'll be looking at the question of how to innovate to build government in fragile states. Thank you.